The Lost Colony of Roanoke, the town that disappeared. Chapter 1, The Arrival, A New Hope in a New Land. The year was 1587. Across the endless Atlantic, 3 wooden ships rocked gently on the waves. The horizon stretched far and wide, a blur of sea and sky, filled with possibility and danger alike. On board, 117 settlers, men, women, and children, held tightly to their belongings, their tools, their prayers, and, most importantly, their hope. Hope for a life untouched by the poverty and hardship of England. Hope for a land where freedom could finally take root. England had grown harsh. Poverty was widespread. Jobs were scarce. Political tension simmered. For many, survival was a daily struggle. Yet stories had traveled across taverns and marketplaces, rumors of a land across the sea, fertile, free, and vast. There is a new world, people whispered. A place where a man may start again. A land of forests, rivers, and endless opportunity. And so they came. The settlers were led by John White, an experienced artist and colonial governor. His vision was simple yet profound, to build a settlement where English families could thrive, safe and self-sufficient. White promised no gold, no treasure, only the chance to create a new life, a chance so powerful that dozens of families were willing to risk the ocean's uncertainty. The first sight of land. Weeks at sea blurred into months. Days were marked by the rise and fall of the sun over relentless waves. Finally, a cry shattered the monotony. Land. Land ho. Excitement swept across the decks. Mothers lifted children to sea, men hurried to the railings. After months of endless water, the sight of solid earth filled them with awe. It was Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Its dense forests, clear waters, and untouched soil offered the settlers the first glimpse of paradise, or so they thought. John White stood at the helm, eyes scanning the green horizon. His coat flapped in the wind. Calmly, he declared, "Here, we begin. This is where we make our stand. This is where we build our future." For a fleeting moment, all fear vanished. All eyes reflected hope, ambition, and belief. Stepping ashore. The rowboats were lowered into the waves. Oars dipped in, carrying the settlers toward their new reality. As feet touched the land, the settlers felt the soil beneath them, cool and moist. Children ran freely, laughing, chasing insects and butterflies. Women lifted their babies, feeling the safety of solid ground after months at sea. Men imagined the walls, homes, and fences they would soon build. Yet the forest beyond whispered. Shadows moved silently among the trees. The settlers did not yet understand, they were entering a world both beautiful and indifferent, a land full of life yet governed by forces they could not predict. The first days. Work began immediately. The men chopped timber, cleared land, and dug foundations. The women built shelters, tended to children, and cooked over open fires. Smoke curled into the sky, mixing with the fresh scent of the forest and the salt of the sea. John White took to sketching the settlement and its surroundings, documenting every tree, every river bend, and every human face. To him, the island was a canvas, full of promise and peril. The settlers began to understand the island's dual nature. Its beauty was alluring, but its quietness was unnerving. Birds sang, but somewhere deep within the woods, unknown sounds suggested eyes watching, waiting. The land did not welcome them, it merely allowed them to exist, for now. Native tribes. The island was not empty. Native tribes had inhabited Roanoke for centuries, the Croatoan and the Secotun among them. These people knew the land intimately, its seasons, its dangers, its resources. Some tribes approached the newcomers with curiosity, others with suspicion. John White attempted diplomacy, offering gifts of cloth, copper, and tools. He spoke gently. "We come in peace. We seek to live beside you, not in place of you." The Croatoan tribe observed silently. Their eyes were calm, unreadable, but their stillness spoke volumes. Trust would have to be earned, through time, behavior, and mutual understanding. Not all tribes were welcoming. Some watched with suspicion, fearing the newcomers might take more than they gave. Yet, for now, the settlers believed peace was possible. Settling in. The settlers built a fort and several homes, planting small gardens in patches of cleared soil. Children explored cautiously, learning the lay of the land. Daily life became a mix of labor and adaptation, fishing, hunting, gathering, and tending crops. Despite their determination, challenges grew. The soil resisted cultivation. Rivers were shallow or teeming with elusive fish. Wildlife fled the settlers' intrusion. Hunger was a constant whisper. Even as they struggled, moments of wonder appeared. Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter, gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. Tears of joy flowed as the settlers held her, seeing in her the embodiment of hope and future. The shadow of scarcity. Joy, however, could not mask reality. Supplies from England were limited. Fishing nets returned with little. Hunting parties brought home smaller game. Some native tribes refused trade. Families survived on berries, roots, and occasional fish. Nights were long and cold, fires burned low. Life had become a daily negotiation with the environment, a constant struggle to maintain sustenance, health, and morale. John White recognized the pressing need for assistance. Supplies, reinforcements, and additional settlers were essential. Yet the voyage back to England was fraught with uncertainty. Storms, political tensions, and the vast Atlantic threatened every journey. The farewell. One morning, John White prepared to depart. The sky was gray, the wind restless. The settlers gathered at the shore. Eleanor held Virginia close. "Father, return quickly," she whispered. John White placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I will. Hold on. Do not lose hope." The ship pulled away, sails billowing, until it became a speck on the horizon. The settlers watched until nothing remained but empty water and the whisper of waves. For the first time, the colony was alone, completely, utterly alone. 3 years of silence. Months passed. Seasons changed. A year went by. Yet John White could not return. Wars in Europe, seized ships, and political turmoil kept the Atlantic closed to him. Finally, after 3 years, he made the journey back to Roanoke Island. What he found was silent, haunting, and inexplicable. Homes were empty. Fires had long since died. Gardens were overgrown. Smoke no longer spiraled into the sky. The settlers, the men, women, and children, they were gone. The wooden fort remained intact. Tools and belongings lay untouched. And there, carved into a post, was one word. Croatoan. No other clues. No bodies. No evidence of violence. Only a single, haunting word that has puzzled historians for centuries. The colony had not been destroyed. It had vanished, leaving behind mystery, speculation, and a chilling testament to the fragility of human endeavor in a new world. Conclusion of Chapter 1. The settlers arrived with hope. They built, they lived, and they struggled. They created the first seeds of what they imagined as a new life in America. Yet, fate, or perhaps forces unknown, ensured that history would remember them not for survival, but for disappearance. The story of Roanoke is not only about people lost at sea, or settlers vanishing from a forested island. It is about hope confronted by uncertainty, about courage in the face of nature, and about the enduring human fascination with mysteries that have no explanation. And so begins the tale of the Lost Colony of Roanoke, a story of dreams, struggles, and the haunting silence of the unknown. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, its waves rolling and crashing as though testing the resolve of the 117 settlers aboard 3 weathered wooden ships. They had been at sea for months, enduring storms that tore at sails, waves that threatened to engulf them, and days of endless monotony where the horizon offered nothing but more water. Yet the minds and hearts of these travelers were consumed with a singular vision, a new life, untouched by the constraints and hardships of England. Every face aboard the ships told a story of courage, fear, and determination. Men had left trades, farms, and families behind. Women had crossed oceans while caring for children in their arms. Even the youngest were carried across waters that most adults feared. They had been told tales of fertile land, abundant rivers, and forests teeming with game. Much of it was rumor, but rumor was enough to spark hope in those desperate for change. At the helm was John White, the appointed governor and a man whose vision was to transform the unknown into a home for future generations. He had convinced families to follow him not with promises of wealth, but with the idea of freedom and opportunity, a chance to start anew. His authority was calm, his resolve unwavering, and his sketches and records were meant to immortalize the first English settlement in the New World. The first glimpse of land. For weeks, the settlers had only seen the relentless blue of the Atlantic. Then, one morning, the lookout shouted with excitement. Land ahead. A wave of relief and exhilaration swept through the decks. Mothers lifted children to see the promise of land. Men scrambled to the railings. After months of deprivation and endless water, the sight of solid earth brought tears, smiles, and quiet awe. It was Roanoke Island, a strip of green rising from the Atlantic off what is now North Carolina. Trees towered along the shoreline, the rivers glistened under the sun, and the beaches beckoned with their sandy embrace. For a moment, fear and uncertainty were pushed aside. John White gazed at the land and whispered, almost to himself. Here is where our future begins. Here, we will make our mark. The settlers felt hope swelling in their hearts, a fragile but insistent flame that would guide them in the days to come. Landing on new soil. Rowboats ferried the settlers ashore. Feet sank into the wet sand, and the cool earth pressed upward against their shoes. Children ran ahead, laughter echoing like a melody across the beach. Women held infants tightly, inhaling the scent of fresh land, while men began to envision homes, fields, and gardens to cultivate. Beyond the shoreline, the forest loomed. Shadows shifted between the trees, and rustling leaves hinted at creatures unseen. The settlers were entering a world ancient and untamed, a land that had its own rhythms and guardians. It was a new beginning, yes, but also a test of endurance, adaptability, and courage. The first weeks. Daily life demanded tireless work. Men chopped timber, cleared land, and constructed shelters. Women cooked over open fires, tended to children, and helped build homes. The scent of fresh cut wood mingled with pine and salt air, creating an atmosphere both invigorating and exhausting. John White sketched and documented constantly, trees, rivers, flora, fauna, and settlers at work. Every drawing was a record of effort and survival, a testament to human determination against the unknown. Yet, beneath the beauty, the island had an undercurrent of unease. The forest was alive in ways the settlers did not yet understand. Branches snapped in the undergrowth, birds called in unfamiliar patterns, and the wind carried sounds that seemed to whisper secrets. Life here was not as simple as planting seeds or raising homes, it demanded respect, patience, and observation. Encounter with native tribes. The settlers were not alone. The land had been home for generations to native tribes, including the Croatoan and the Secotun. These tribes moved with intimate knowledge of the forests, rivers, and animals. Some approached the newcomers with curiosity, others with caution. White offered gifts, beads, cloth, and small tools, and spoke in measured tones. We come seeking friendship and peace. We wish to live beside you, not in place of you. The Croatoan observed in silence, their faces unreadable. Trust would have to be earned. Other tribes remained watchful, wary of foreigners who could claim land that was not theirs. Peace was possible, but fragile. Every action, every step, had to be considered. Settling in. Homes were built, gardens planted, and small fields prepared for cultivation. Children explored cautiously, learning the land's boundaries, its hidden dangers, and the patterns of wildlife. Hunting and fishing became essential, yet unpredictable. Rivers yielded fish inconsistently, animals fled deeper into the forest, and food remained scarce. Amid the struggle, a moment of hope arrived. Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter, gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. Her arrival was celebrated as a symbol of life, continuity, and the settlers' enduring hope. For a moment, exhaustion and fear were forgotten, replaced by joy and relief. Challenges and scarcity. Despite this new life, survival was arduous. Supplies from England were insufficient. Fishing and hunting were inconsistent. Storms often made rivers and shores dangerous. Some tribes refused to trade, others remained distant observers. Families subsisted on berries, roots, and whatever fish or game could be caught. Nights were cold, and the firewood supply was never enough to banish the chill. John White realized that assistance from England was essential. Supplies, reinforcements, and additional settlers were crucial for survival. The journey back to England was risky, yet unavoidable. John White's departure. One gray morning, John White prepared to sail back to England. The settlers gathered on the shore. Eleanor held Virginia close, her eyes wet with tears. "Return quickly, father," she whispered. John White placed his hand upon her shoulder. "I will. Hold on. Keep faith in one another. I will return." The ship pulled away, sails filled with wind. The settlers watched until it was a mere speck on the horizon. Alone, the colony faced an uncertain and unforgiving future. The silent years. Months turned to seasons, seasons into years. 1 year became 2, then 3. Political turmoil in England prevented White from returning sooner. When he finally arrived at Roanoke, the scene was haunting. Homes were abandoned, fires long extinguished, gardens overgrown, and not a soul in sight. Belongings remained, untouched, as if everyone had vanished in an instant. Carved into a post was a single, enigmatic word. Croatoan. No graves. No bodies. No evidence of conflict. Only mystery. The settlers had not been destroyed. They had disappeared. Their fate, unknown. Their story became a legend, a testament to hope, courage, and the unpredictable forces of the New World. Closing thoughts. The first settlers arrived with courage, ambition, and dreams. They built, they endured, they celebrated life, and yet, the land demanded its toll. Nature, isolation, and the unknown tested them beyond imagination. The story of Roanoke is not merely one of disappearance. It is a tale of human resilience, hope against uncertainty, and the haunting allure of mystery that stretches across centuries. Here begins the tale of the Lost Colony of Roanoke, a story of beginnings, survival, and the silence left behind by those who dared to dream. After the departure of John White, the settlers of Roanoke Island were left to confront a new reality, one that demanded courage, resilience, and ingenuity unlike anything they had faced before. With the governor gone and no promise of immediate return, the settlers had to rely entirely on their own resourcefulness. The New World, lush and inviting at first glance, soon revealed itself as a place of hidden dangers, unpredictable weather, and endless challenges that tested both body and spirit. From the earliest days, survival was the settlers' foremost concern. Food was never guaranteed. The island, though rich in forests and rivers, offered resources that required knowledge and skill to harvest. Hunting and fishing became daily necessities. Men ventured into thick forests to track deer, rabbits, and other game, learning the paths and behaviors of animals. They discovered that many animals were shy and elusive, and that hunting in unfamiliar territory required patience and ingenuity. Meanwhile, women and children gathered edible plants, roots, and berries, developing an intimate knowledge of which flora were safe to eat and which could harm them. Water, too, presented a challenge. Although the island was surrounded by rivers and streams, not all sources were reliable or safe. Settlers dug shallow wells and learned to collect rainwater. But the need for fresh, clean water was a constant concern. Illnesses often arose from contaminated water, and the lack of medical knowledge made every sickness potentially deadly. Daily life and labor. The rhythms of daily life revolved around survival tasks. At dawn, men would leave the fort armed with bows, arrows, or simple spears, venturing into forests to hunt or fish. Women would tend to gardens, prepare food, repair shelters, and care for the young and elderly. Children, though sometimes allowed moments of play, were often enlisted to assist in small chores, carrying water, gathering firewood, or helping with planting. The settlers also faced challenges in securing shelter. Their initial huts and houses, hastily constructed upon arrival, were often inadequate against storms and harsh weather. Rain could seep through roofs, strong winds could loosen walls, and the heat and humidity of the summer months brought insects and disease. Improving and reinforcing their homes became a critical task, requiring teamwork, creativity, and constant attention. Fire played a central role in their survival. Beyond cooking and warmth, fire was essential for protection. Smoke could keep insects away, deter wild animals, and signal other settlers in case of emergency. Gathering firewood, however, required long trips into the forest, exposing the settlers to new dangers and the unpredictable temperament of the island's wildlife. Encounters with the unknown. The forest was alive with sounds and movements that the settlers did not understand. Birds called in unfamiliar patterns. Small animals rustled through underbrush, and the wind carried strange noises that made nights particularly tense. Some settlers reported seeing shadows among the trees, shapes that seemed human but disappeared when approached. Fear of the unknown became a part of daily life, a shadow that accompanied every step outside the safety of the fort. At the same time, the settlers observed the signs of native presence. Croatoan villages could be seen in the distance, and smoke from fires often drifted across the island. Some settlers attempted cautious approaches to trade or communicate. Bartering with the tribes became essential, not only for food but also for knowledge, learning which plants were edible, where game could be found, and which areas of the island were safest to travel. Trust, however, was fragile. Misunderstandings could turn neighbors into enemies, and the settlers quickly realized that diplomacy required patience, observation, and respect. Virginia Dare and the children. Life on the island continued to evolve around the families, and the presence of children like Virginia Dare brought both hope and responsibility. Children were both vulnerable and essential. Their survival symbolized the continuation of the colony, and every effort was made to protect them. Women developed ways to keep infants and toddlers safe while performing daily labor. Older children were taught the ways of the forest, the patterns of animals, and the skills needed to gather food and water. Education, in the practical sense, was essential. Children learned which berries were poisonous, how to fish in rivers, how to recognize signs of approaching storms, and how to navigate the dense woods. Every day offered lessons, often learned through trial and error, and mistakes could carry heavy consequences. Challenges of food and agriculture. Farming became a critical concern. The soil of Roanoke Island was fertile in some areas but challenging in others. Settlers experimented with planting grains, vegetables, and herbs, learning which crops thrived and which failed. Weather conditions were unpredictable, droughts would wither crops, while floods could wash away entire fields. Hunting remained equally vital. Men devised snares and traps, learned tracking techniques, and often returned with game after long, exhausting expeditions. Fishing required knowledge of tides and fish behavior. The settlers' survival depended on this constant interplay of observation, learning, and adaptation. Storms and natural dangers. The island's weather was one of the most formidable challenges. Summer brought intense heat and humidity, along with swarms of insects that carried diseases. Autumn storms could turn rivers into raging torrents and damage homes. Winter, though milder than England in some respects, still brought cold nights and the risk of illness due to dampness and insufficient shelter. The settlers also faced dangers from wild animals. Bears, wolves, and venomous snakes were real threats, while attacks were rare. The constant awareness of possible danger weighed heavily on the settlers' minds. Every journey into the woods, every hunt, carried the risk of injury or worse. Community and cooperation. Survival demanded cooperation. Tasks were divided among families and individuals, each contributing to the colony's collective safety and sustenance. Decision-making was guided by John White's instructions, as well as by practical necessity. Leaders emerged naturally, those with skill in hunting, construction, or diplomacy often took responsibility for organizing efforts. Social bonds were tested and strengthened by shared hardship. Arguments were inevitable, but so were moments of camaraderie. Celebrations, small as they might be, were held to honor births, harvests, or successful hunts. These moments of relief reinforced the settlers' commitment to one another and to their shared goal of establishing a permanent settlement. Health and illness. Disease was a constant threat. Minor injuries could become deadly without proper care. Contaminated water and spoiled food were ever-present dangers. Settlers relied on traditional remedies, herbs, and the knowledge of local tribes when possible. Despite their efforts, illness claimed lives, reminding everyone that survival was not only about labor and courage, but also about vigilance and adaptability. Psychological health was equally important. Isolation and fear could weigh heavily on even the strongest individuals. The settlers coped with anxiety through routines, storytelling, and faith. Religion and prayer provided solace, while shared labor and mutual reliance reinforced the sense of purpose and belonging, building a sustainable settlement. As weeks turned to months, the settlers began to think in terms of long-term sustainability. They expanded gardens, reinforced shelters, and improved water collection methods. Knowledge gained from the land, the weather, and the native tribes was gradually integrated into their daily practices. Each improvement was a small victory. Each day survived was a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. The settlers understood that permanence was possible only if they adapted to the island, respected its rhythms, and worked together. The mystery of the disappearance. Despite their efforts, challenges remained formidable. Communication with England was impossible until John White's eventual return. Supplies dwindled, threats of storms and disease persisted, and the need for trust and cooperation never ceased. These pressures, combined with the isolation of the island, created a tense and precarious existence. While the settlers survived, the colony's story would ultimately take a mysterious turn, a fate that history remembers as the Lost Colony. Closing reflection. Life on Roanoke Island was a relentless test of human endurance. It demanded courage, creativity, and the willingness to adapt to circumstances beyond imagination. Every day was filled with work, observation, and learning. Every night brought challenges of sleep, safety, and preparation for the unknown. The story of survival is not merely one of hardship, it is also a story of ingenuity, courage, and the bonds forged between families and neighbors. The settlers' ability to adapt, to learn from the land and its inhabitants, and to persevere under extreme circumstances, defines the essence of life on the island. Through it all, hope remained the guiding force. The birth of children, successful hunts, harvests, and moments of cooperation reminded the settlers that a future was possible, even in the face of the unknown. And yet, the ultimate mystery of Roanoke loomed over them. A silent presence that would echo through history, leaving questions unanswered and a story unfinished. By the summer of 1587, life on Roanoke Island had settled into a fragile rhythm. The settlers had endured storms, scarcity, and the challenges of an unfamiliar land. But they had also built a semblance of community, cultivated gardens, hunted game, and celebrated the birth of Virginia Dare, a symbol of hope and continuity for the fledgling colony. Yet, amid this precarious balance, a critical decision loomed that would change the course of their story forever. Governor John White, entrusted with leadership, understood that the colony could not survive without support from England. Supplies were dwindling, essential tools and seeds were running low, and the settlers had limited knowledge of sustainable farming in the new world. White's solution was both necessary and perilous. He would return to England to gather reinforcements and provisions, leaving the settlers behind with a solemn promise: "I will return as quickly as the seas and fortune allow. Hold fast, and your courage will see you through until then." The settlers trusted him. Families prepared for the temporary separation, securing homes, storing food, and teaching each other essential skills to endure the governor's absence. They were confident in their ability to adapt. Yet the uncertainty of the Atlantic and the long journey to England introduced an unavoidable tension. Preparing for departure. The day of departure was somber. Ships were readied, supplies loaded, and final instructions given. John White walked among the settlers, offering guidance and reassurance. Mothers held their children tightly, whispering prayers for safety. Men gripped tools and weapons, preparing to face whatever challenges the island might bring in White's absence. The settlers gathered at the shore, watching as the governor's ship prepared to set sail. Smoke from cooking fires mingled with the salt-laden breeze. Eleanor Dare held Virginia close, the infant's wide eyes reflecting the fear and hope of her family. White knelt for a brief moment, placing a hand on Virginia's tiny shoulder. "I will return," he promised. "Keep faith in one another, and our dreams will endure." With sails billowing, the ship pulled away from the shore, leaving behind families whose lives had now shifted into a precarious balance of hope and endurance. Initial months without leadership. Life on the island transformed immediately after White's departure. Without a formal leader to guide decisions, settlers relied heavily on communal cooperation and the skills they had developed. In the months since arrival, tasks became more divided, with each family contributing to the colony's survival. Men focused on hunting and fortifying shelters. The dense forests and unpredictable terrain demanded new strategies for tracking game and avoiding hazards. Bows, traps, and improvised spears became indispensable tools for sustenance. Women assumed critical roles beyond domestic responsibilities, managing gardens, tending to children, and organizing communal meals. Their efforts were vital to the colony's stability. They learned to identify edible plants, purify water, and improvise solutions for daily challenges. From repairing damaged homes to creating simple medical remedies using local herbs. Children, though still vulnerable, adapted quickly. They learned hunting techniques, foraged under supervision, and contributed to the colony's daily survival. Each generation became a testament to the settlers' resilience, carrying the knowledge needed to endure in the new world. Food scarcity and resource management. Despite determination and skill, the settlers faced increasing scarcity. Initial stores of preserved food dwindled rapidly, and reliance on hunting and foraging became absolute. Seasonal changes introduced additional challenges. Droughts threatened crops, floods washed away fields, and hurricanes swept across the coastline, destroying homes and gardens. Fishing, once a reliable source of sustenance, became unpredictable. Shallow rivers and shifting tides forced settlers to adapt constantly. Game animals, wary of human intrusion, required more sophisticated tracking and trapping methods. Food scarcity remained a daily struggle, with each successful hunt celebrated as both survival and triumph. The role of native tribes. Interaction with native tribes remained critical for survival. Some tribes, like the Croatoan, continued to trade, offering knowledge of edible plants, safe water sources, and seasonal patterns of wildlife. However, these interactions required caution. Miscommunication or overstepping boundaries could quickly turn allies into adversaries. Settlers learned to observe without immediate interference, to negotiate cautiously, and to respect local customs. Every transaction, every shared resource, became an opportunity to strengthen relations while minimizing conflict. Yet, trust was fragile, and the balance of peace required vigilance. Building and maintaining homes. Shelters had to withstand storms, humidity, and occasional flooding. Early huts, though adequate, needed constant repair. Settlers reinforced walls with additional timber, constructed drainage channels, and improved roofs to repel rain. Fireplaces were expanded for warmth and cooking efficiency. The physical labor required for these improvements consumed significant energy but was essential for long-term survival. In addition to functional construction, settlers also created markers and boundaries to organize the settlement. Paths were cleared, gardens delineated, and communal areas maintained to ensure the colony functioned as an interconnected system rather than isolated units. Psychological and social challenges. Isolation and uncertainty weighed heavily on the settlers. The absence of John White created a leadership vacuum that increased stress and tension within the colony. Disputes arose over resources, responsibilities, and decisions about hunting, gardening, and construction. At the same time, the settlers leaned on one another for emotional support. Storytelling, songs, and religious observances helped maintain morale. The birth of children like Virginia Dare reinforced a sense of purpose and continuity. Celebrations, though modest, provided relief from the constant pressure of survival, and reinforced social bonds that were essential for collective resilience. Natural disasters and threats. The New World was unpredictable. Hurricanes, intense thunderstorms, and sudden floods tested the settlers' ability to protect their homes and food supplies. Storms could destroy crops, sweep away freshly built homes, and isolate families from one another. Wild animals also posed threats. Bears, wolves, and venomous snakes were constant reminders that the settlers were guests in a land ruled by natural forces. Awareness, preparation, and caution became critical survival skills. And every excursion into the forest carried inherent risk. Waiting and hope. The absence of John White created a constant tension between hope and despair. Letters and instructions were impossible to deliver, and news from England remained uncertain. Each passing day without his return intensified both longing and anxiety. Yet, the settlers persevered, holding on to the promise that their leader had made. The promise of return became both a guiding principle and a source of emotional weight. Faith, determination, and shared responsibility sustained the colony, even as uncertainty grew. Adaptation and ingenuity. Necessity drove innovation. Settlers developed new tools, adapted European agricultural practices to the island's conditions, and learned from the knowledge shared by native tribes. Water filtration methods were improved. Fishing techniques evolved to match local species and tides. Shelter construction incorporated lessons from experience, weather, and observation. Every adaptation increased the settlers' ability to endure, though none could eliminate the risks inherent in isolation. Environmental unpredictability and human vulnerability. The growing mystery. Even as the settlers worked tirelessly to survive, an invisible pressure loomed. The isolation from England, the inability to secure reinforcements, and the continuous challenges of survival created an environment in which uncertainty reigned. Each day, the colony persisted, but the memory of the promise, John White's return, was a shadow that hung over every decision, every harvest, and every night spent watching for storms or predators. The story of survival became intertwined with the story of the unknown, setting the stage for the ultimate mystery that would define Roanoke, a community left to endure against odds, awaiting a leader who would not return in time. Closing reflection. The departure of John White marked a turning point. It transformed the colony from a fledgling settlement guided by leadership to a community defined by cooperation, ingenuity, and resilience. Every action, from planting crops to hunting game, from reinforcing homes to maintaining social cohesion, reflected the settlers' determination to survive. Yet, the promise that had been made was fragile. Without reinforcement or guidance, the colony faced uncertainty at every turn. The settlers' survival, while remarkable, could not fully overcome the combination of isolation, environmental hazards, and the unknown. The story of the Lost Colony is not merely one of disappearance. It is a narrative of courage, hope, and the human capacity to adapt under extreme circumstances. The departure of the leader set into motion a sequence of challenges that would test the very limits of endurance, creating the tension and mystery that continues to captivate historians and audiences alike. And so, the promise that was never kept became a central element of the Roanoke story, a story of human perseverance, the hazards of the unknown, and the haunting legacy of those who remained behind. The ocean was wide, unforgiving, and unpredictable. John White had left the island, left his people, his own daughter Eleanor, his newborn granddaughter Virginia Dare, with a promise: "I will return soon." But the sea had other plans. The first winter on Roanoke Island, time moved differently. The sun still rose, the tides still shifted, but hope, that was beginning to fade. The colonists waited. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months turned into years. The first winter was the hardest. Their food stores, already limited, began to shrink. They divided meals into smaller and smaller portions. Bread was baked from crushed acorns and ground roots. Meat became rare, almost mythical. Some nights, you could hear the children crying, not from fear, but from hunger. The air was cold. The wind howled against their cabins. Wood was scarce, and every spark of fire was precious. But even in the deepest cold, they kept one belief alive. John White will return. They spoke his name like a prayer. Like a promise they were forcing reality to remember. The villagers and the forest. The Algonquian tribes around the island watched the colonists carefully. Some tribes were friendly, offering herbs, fish, roots, and advice. Others remained distant, suspicious, silent shadows behind the trees. The colonists learned quickly. Never stray too deep into the woods. Never travel alone. Never ignore the signs carved by unseen hands. Because the forest was alive. At night the trees sounded like they were whispering. Branches swayed though the wind was still. Birds stopped singing whenever footsteps approached. Fear became a quiet companion. Yet the colonists endured. They fished. They rebuilt. They planted. They hunted, though some hunts ended with fewer men returning than had left. Slowly, painfully, they learned to survive. But hope was dying. The longest pain is not hunger. Not cold. Not fear. It is waiting. It is waking up every day expecting a sail on the horizon, and seeing only empty blue. It is listening to waves and hearing nothing but the ocean swallowing the world. Children asked, "When is grandfather coming back?" Mothers smiled softly. "Soon." But their eyes no longer matched their words. The second year, the island changes. By the second year, the island was northwest longer the same place it once was. Storms came more frequently. Thunder rolled across the sky like a warning. Trees shook violently against winds that came from nowhere. Some nights, the air tasted like metal. The sea glowed faintly, as if lit from below. Fishermen refused to sail during those nights. People whispered, "Is this place cursed?" They weren't alone in thinking so. The tribes spoke of old spirits, beings tied to land and sea long before humans came. They said, "Some places do not want to be touched." But the colonists had already built homes. Buried their dead, planted their hopes. They had nowhere else to go. The first disappearances. It began quietly. One morning, a hunter named Thomas did not return. They searched for him for 2 days. No tracks. No signs of struggle. No blood. No footprints. He had simply vanished. Then another. And another. People started sleeping closer together. Fires stayed burning all night. No one walked alone, not even to fetch water. The island felt like it was watching them. Fear becomes routine. By the third year, silence became normal. No boats. No letters. No noise but wind and waves. Even the colonists' voices grew quieter. They spoke less, because speaking meant acknowledging the truth. No rescue was coming. But then, something changed. It was a late summer evening when the lookout shouted, "Smoke! Smoke on the horizon!" Everyone rushed to the beach. There, far out on the water, were sails. Not clouds. Not illusions. Not dreams. Actual ships. People shouted, screamed, cried. Mothers lifted their children. Men fell to their knees in the sand. Some simply stared in disbelief. Rescue. At last. Hope returned like fire in their blood. They lit signal fires. They waved cloth and wood. They shouted across the water. But the ships never came closer. A storm was building behind them, heavy, dark clouds swallowing the sky. The ships turned away. And disappeared. The colonists stood on the shore long after they were gone. The waves washed over their footprints. The storm broke. And the island was silent again. The final decision. The leaders gathered. We cannot wait anymore. We must survive. We must move. Some suggested joining nearby tribes. Some suggested traveling inland. Some wanted to build rafts and risk the open sea. They carved a message. Not out of panic. Not rushed. But calm. Deliberate. Real. Croatoan. It was not a cry for help. It was a direction. A choice. A way forward. The last night on Roanoke. They packed only what they could carry. Seeds. Tools. Their faith. They tore down what they could not take, so no enemy could use it. The fires burned slow, controlled, intentional. No panic. No chaos. Just quiet resolve. The moon was high when they lined up to leave. A soft wind blew from inland, warm, unfamiliar. Children clung to their mothers. Men looked back one last time. The island that had given them hope had also taken everything. They walked into the forest, torches held high. One by one, their figures faded between the trees. Then, silence. The kind that feels like an ending. An ending that has no witness. 3 years later, John White returned. He walked onto the island that once held his family. No voices. No laughter. No footprints. Only the carved word. Croatoan. He called out. No answer. He searched the houses. Empty. He searched the woods. Silent. He searched the beach. Nothing. The colony was gone. Not destroyed. Not murdered. Not burned. Just gone. Like they had walked off the edge of the world. Narrator close. Some mysteries are solved. Some are explained. Some are understood with time. But this one remained in the wind. In the waves. In the trees of Roanoke. And even today, no one has ever truly found them. But their footsteps are still there. Somewhere. Waiting to be heard. The sea was calm on the morning John White returned. The waves rolled slowly toward the sand as if whispering the past. The sails of his ship fluttered against the soft Atlantic wind. No storms. No thunder. Just a quiet, unsettling stillness. Everything felt too calm. John White stood at the bow of the ship. Eyes fixed on the shoreline of Roanoke Island. His hands trembled, not from age, but from fear. 3 years. 3 long years since he last saw his daughter Eleanor. 3 years since he held his granddaughter Virginia Dare. 3 years since he had made a promise. I will come back for you. He had imagined this moment thousands of times. Eleanor running to him. Virginia calling out, "Grandfather." The colonists cheering. A village alive with laughter. Smoke rising from cooking fires. Children playing in the sand. But the island was quiet. Too quiet. No movement. No sound. No figures waiting on the shore. Just silence. Dead silence. The landing. When the boat touched the sand, John stepped foot onto the island slowly. His boots sank lightly into the shoreline, sand just the way he remembered it. Familiar yet wrong. He called out. "Eleanor." "Virginia." His voice echoed across the beach. And died there. No footsteps approached. No shadows moved. Just wind. His men followed behind him, looking around with lowered heads. They had all heard the stories. They all feared what they might find, or fail to find. They began walking inland. The grass was taller. The paths were overgrown. No footprints. No wagon tracks. No broken branches. It was as if nature had swallowed the colony whole. The village. At last, the settlement came into view. Houses. Cabins. Workshops. Everything still there. But empty. Not destroyed. Not burned. Not looted. Just abandoned. Windows stood open. Doors hung loosely. Tools rested exactly where hands had last placed them. A wooden spoon on a table. A rope coil beside a post. A small child's carved toy sitting in the dirt, half buried by time. Life had stopped here in the middle of motion. As if the people had simply stood up one day and walked away. John White walked through the main street, each step slower than the last. His heart pounded. He reached his daughter's house. The door was slightly open. He pushed it gently. It creaked, slow and heavy, like a sigh. Inside. Her chair. Her table. Her blanket still folded neatly. Virginia's small cradle in the corner. John pressed his hand against it. The wood felt cold. He closed his eyes. He could see Virginia there, tiny fingers, soft breathing, new life, new hope. But now. Nothing. Not even dust dared disturb the silence. The search expands. The men spread out in groups. They checked. The wells. The gardens. The food stores. The shoreline. The woods. But there were no bodies. No broken weapons. No blood. No signs of attack. It was not a massacre. It was a disappearance. One of the sailors called out. "Governor. Over here." John rushed to him. There, on a gatepost, was a carving. Deep. Sharp. Deliberate. Croatoan. John lowered his head and exhaled. This was no message of panic. This was not a warning. Not a clue left in fear. This was a direction. A final decision. They left willingly. The people of Roanoke had chosen to move. But where? And were they still alive? Signs in the woods. The men pushed further into the forest. Birds scattered overhead. Branches snapped under boots. The forest felt heavy, as though watching them. They found footprints, but old ones. Faded. Soft. Washed by rain and time. They found a trail, but overgrown, swallowed by vines and roots. The further they moved, the darker the woods felt. A sailor whispered. "Do you think they tried to leave? Or were forced to leave?" John did not answer. Because he did not know. But he feared. Nightfall on the island. The sun began to sink. Light drained from the sky, melting into deep purples and blacks. No one wanted to sleep. But they had no choice. They built fires. They camped in the center of the empty village. The flames flickered against the silent houses, casting shadows that looked almost alive. No one spoke. The crackling wood was the only sound. John sat alone beside the fire, staring at the cradle. He whispered, "Eleanor. I'm here. I came back. I kept my promise. Where are you?" The flames wavered, but gave no answer. The drums. Then, from deep inside the forest, a sound. Boom. Slow. Rhythmic. Measured. A drum. The sailors froze. The sound echoed through the trees, distant yet unmistakable. Boom. 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 No one moved. No one breathed. The drum continued for several minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence. The fire crackled once more. Someone whispered. That wasn't the colonists. John closed his eyes. He knew. The tribes. But which tribe? Friendly. Or hostile? And what did the drums mean? A warning. A message. Or a memory. The morning decision. At sunrise, John gathered his men. There is only one answer, he said. They went to Croatoan Island. The word carved in wood was clear. The path was set. But the sea had changed. Storms surrounded the waters around Croatoan. If they set sail, they risked everything. If they stayed, they had nothing to find. John put his hand on Virginia's cradle one last time. The wood was warm in the morning sun. He whispered, "I will find you." Then, break camp. We leave. A storm rises. But nature did not care about promises. As the ship prepared to depart, the sky darkened. Waves rose. Wind screamed. Thunder rolled across the horizon like a beast awakening. The captain shouted, "If we sail now, we die." John clenched his fists. Another barrier. Another delay. Another year lost to the storm. The storm was not just weather. It felt like something more. Something ancient. Something guarding the unknown. For 3 days the storm raged. When it passed, the season had shifted. Supplies were low. The crew was frightened. They could not sail to Croatoan. Not now. Not yet. John White stood at the rail of the ship, watching Roanoke shrink into the distance. The island that had once held his family was now just a shadow on the horizon. His heart felt as heavy as stone. Narrator close. The homes were still there. The streets still stood. The colony had not died in battle. It had not collapsed. It had not burned. It had simply moved. But moved where? And why? And were they still alive? History never answered. And the ocean never returned what it took. Roanoke remained a question. A whisper. A name carved in wood. And the world would spend centuries searching for the truth. The word was carved deep. Croatoan. Not scratched. Not rushed. Not desperate. Carved with purpose. The letters stood bold on the wooden post, each stroke of the blade clean and steady. Whoever had carved it had taken time. They were not running. They were not hiding. They were leaving a message. John White stared at the carving for a long time, his fingers tracing the grooves. It was the only sign. The only clue. The only voice from the people. Who had vanished without a single footprint left behind. The wind moved softly through the trees. The ocean waves rolled against the shore. But the word remained still. Croatoan. A name. A direction. A final trail left behind. But what did it mean? To some, Croatoan was simply an island. A place south of Roanoke. A place where friendly tribes lived, people who once traded with the settlers. To others, the word was older. Much older. A name spoken in stories whispered around fires. A name that belonged to something unseen. Some said it was a guardian spirit of the coast. A protector of travelers. A watcher of storms and ocean paths. Others said it was a curse. A warning. A final goodbye from the world of the living. But to John White, it meant only one thing. His family could still be alive. And so began the search. The stories of the tribes. Long before the English ships ever crossed the Atlantic, the people of the coast told stories of Croatoan. They spoke of spirit winds that guided some travelers and swallowed others. Voices carried on tides that came from nowhere. A presence in the forests that watched but never revealed itself. An unseen guide that could either protect or erase the unprepared. In these old stories, Croatoan was not just a place. It was a threshold. A border between the world that is known and the world that is not meant to be understood. The English settlers did not know these stories. But the island remembered them. John White seized the signs. As John walked the abandoned settlement, he began seeing things differently. A rope had been cut clean. Not torn. Not broken. Cut by hand. A garden had been harvested. Not ruined. Not abandoned. Used until the final day. Shoes were missing. Clothing was missing. Tools were missing. But no valuables were taken. Gold was left behind. Metal tools remained. The colonists had not fled in fear. They had relocated. But where? Why? And were they welcomed? Or absorbed? Or erased? These questions swarmed John's mind like flies around memory and grief. The weight of a promise. John stood once again beside the cradle. He whispered, "Eleanor. Virginia. I'm here. I kept my promise. His voice cracked. I'm not too late. I can't be too late. But silence is a cruel answer. And silence was all the island had left. The word Croatoan burned into his thoughts. Not a question. A direction. A path. A chance. The decision to search. The crew prepared the ship. The sails were raised. The ropes were tied. The anchor was lifted. They would go to Croatoan Island. John watched the island of Roanoke shrink behind him, fading into mist and distance. But it did not feel like leaving. It felt like pursuit. He was following a trail left by love. The sea stretched endlessly ahead. But John did not look at the ocean. He looked at the horizon. Because on that horizon might be his daughter, his granddaughter, the colony, or answers, or ghosts. He did not know which. But he had to see. The storm that shouldn't have been. The ship moved forward. But nature shifted. The sky darkened. Clouds gathered, thick and heavy, as if drawn by something ancient. Winds rose from nowhere. Waves formed like mountains. Thunder roared deep and long, not like weather, like warning. The captain shouted, "Governor, we must turn back." John held the rail so tight his knuckles turned white. No. They are there. I must reach them. The captain shook his head. Then the sea will take us. The storm raged harder. Rain hit like stone. Waves crashed like walls. Lightning opened up the sky. It was not a storm of chance. It felt like something alive. Something guarding Croatoan. Something saying, "Do not follow. Do not return. Do not uncover what is no longer yours." After hours of battle, the ship gave way. It turned. It retreated. They survived. But the island slipped away into the fog. And John White watched it disappear. He never saw it again. Years later, rumors begin. People talked. Travelers spoke of villages deep inland where some natives had English features. Children with pale hair and blue eyes. Words spoken in accents that did not belong to the tribes. Houses that looked more English than native. Cross symbols carved in wood. Songs sung in melodies that did not belong to the forest. A child who answered to the name. Virginia. Explorers insisted. The colonists had survived. But no proof was ever found. No journal. No letter. No grave. No witness. Just stories. Stories are powerful. Stories survive where bodies do not. Stories whisper what history cannot speak. The word that outlived the colony. The years passed. Then decades. Then centuries. The trees grew thicker. The land reshaped itself. The sea erased footprints, houses, and bones. Yet one thing remained. Croatoan. It reappeared again and again across American history. Carved into the post at Roanoke. Written in the diary of Edgar Allan Poe the day before he died. Found scratched into a tree near where a vanished sailor disappeared in 1888. Found etched into a doorframe in a house where a child vanished without a trace. Whispered in stories of disappearances across the coast. The word did not fade. It followed the world. Not as a clue. As a shadow. Some began to say, Croatoan was never the place they went. Croatoan was what took them. Others said, no, Croatoan saved them. Which was true. The world never agreed. Because the world never knew. John White's final memory. When John White grew old, he would sometimes sit by the water. He would watch the horizon and whisper to the waves. I tried. I tried to come back. No one knows the exact day he died. No one knows where he was buried. No one knows his last words. But history believes. He died believing one thing. They were still alive somewhere. And that belief is all Roanoke left behind. Narration close. Some mysteries remain unsolved not because answers do not exist, but because the answers were never meant to be discovered. Roanoke was never just a colony. It was a whisper. A message. A disappearance that was not a tragedy, but a transformation. The word carved on the tree was not fear. It was a door. A beginning. A crossing. Croatoan. A name that still waits in the wind. Maybe they survived. Maybe they thrived. Maybe they became something new. Or maybe the island took them somewhere the world cannot follow. Wherever they went, they did not leave without telling us. They left one word. A word the world is still trying to understand. The story of Roanoke does not end on the island. It does not end with empty houses, footprints in the sand, or the single carved word on the wooden post. Croatoan. No. The real ending lives in whispers. In theories. In fragments of truth buried under centuries of silence. Because what happened to those men, women, and children was not recorded in any book. No document survived. No witness lived to tell the tale. So history was forced to guess. And when history guesses, it creates myths. But myths always hide a truth. Somewhere. The final days of Roanoke. Imagine them one last time. The fires in the colony had grown smaller. The sound of children laughing had faded. The walls of the houses were weak, worn, salt-faded. Voices were quiet. Faces were thinner. They were not simply settlers anymore. They were survivors. The ocean that once represented hope now represented betrayal. Every morning, they walked to the shore and looked outward, searching the horizon. But there were no sails. No ships. No help. Just waves. Endless waves. And silence. Pain changes people. Hunger changes people. Waiting destroys people. Roanoke was a colony built on trust. But trust had run out. The meeting under the dying sun. One evening, the final evening. As the sun bled red across the sky, the remaining colonists gathered in the center of the village. The leaders spoke softly. The children watched their parents. Everyone listened. No one wanted to leave. But everyone knew they had to. They could not survive another winter. Not alone. So they made one final choice. A choice that would echo for centuries. They left the island. But where did they go? That is the heart of the mystery. Theory 1, they went to Croatoan. The word carved into the tree was not random. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, home to a friendly native tribe. And many historians believe the colonists simply moved there. They learned their language. They adopted their culture. They survived. Not as English, but as something new. This theory gained evidence 50 years later when explorers found English-style wooden houses among the Croatoan tribes. Children with light hair and gray-blue eyes. English words mixed into native speech. Iron tools that the tribes should not have known how to make. The colonists were not lost. They were absorbed. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe they just became something different. But if this is true, why did no one ever return to England? Why didn't they seek out home? The answer may be simple. After years of hunger, fear, and abandonment, England was no longer home. Theory 2, the attack. Not all tribes were friendly. The Powhatan Confederacy nearby had warnings about English expansion. They believed the settlers would take land, bring more ships, more armies. And so, some historians believe there was violence. A raid. A war. A final stand. The colony did not fade. It fell. But the problem with this theory is haunting. No skeletons were ever found. No burnt houses. No signs of battle. The colony was empty. Like they simply walked away. Theory 3, the storm. The outer banks of North Carolina are brutal. Hurricanes roar like 1,000 drums. Winds tear houses from the earth. Some believe a storm swept through the island, destroying the colony in a single violent night. But again, where are the bodies? Storms destroy structures. They do not erase people. Theory 4, the Lost March. Some suggest the colony tried to walk inland, hundreds of miles, searching for safety. They carried what they could. They left everything else behind. They followed rivers, forests, mountains. But if they did, they died along the way. Starvation, cold, exhaustion. No graves, no markers. Just silence scattered across the wilderness. A disappearance stretched across the land. Not in one place, but in every direction. Theory 5, the unspeakable one. This theory is whispered, not taught. Some native tribes told stories of spirits on Roanoke Island. Ancient spirits. Not evil. Not good. Just old. Older than the forests. Older than the sea. The tribes believed the island was alive. That it watched. That it chose. And sometimes it took. The settlers ignored these warnings. They built homes where no home should stand. They lit fires where no fire should burn. And in time, the island took back what was hers. This is not history. This is legend. But legends exist for a reason. The truth that hurts, maybe the biggest mystery of Roanoke, is not what happened, but why no one ever spoke of it. When John White finally returned, 3 years too late, he did not lead a rescue mission. He did not search the forests. He did not sail to Croatoan. He did not send scouts inland. He left. He went back to England. He never returned. Not even once. He told the world the colony was gone. And the world believed him. But ask yourself, if your family was missing, would you stop looking? The real lost truth. History is written by those who survived. But no one from Roanoke survived to tell their story. So others told it for them. Politicians, kings, historians, explorers. They wrote what suited them, not what was true. So the truth was lost. Not the colony. The truth. The final words. Maybe the settlers of Roanoke were not lost. Maybe they lived, loved, learned, became something new. Maybe they left behind the name English to become something greater. And maybe Roanoke is not a mystery to be solved. Maybe it is a reminder that history does not always tell the full story. Sometimes the truth is not written. It is remembered. In blood. In language. In faces. In silence. Roanoke did not disappear. It just changed. And change is the most human thing of all.